hard to imagine a world where heroes don't exist. And I'm not just talking about the superpowered kind, although those are usually my favorite to talk about. All throughout history, we have been treated to stories about people, men and women, doing heroic things and having their actions memorialized in song or in a narrative. Even before there was visual media, there were the stories that were passed down between generations, like the legend of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, the tale of Beowulf, King Odysseus in Homer's epic, the story of Hercules, and so many others who performed actions and went through trials a lot bigger than they were. There's a reason that those stories haven't been forgotten about and are constantly revisited. The trend continues from oral stories to books, and finally movies and television shows that took the ideas that we had of heroes and memorialized them into something we could physically see, not just in our imaginations. Heroes have always held great appeal, not just because of the uniqueness of their stories, but because their actions were significant in a way that any one of us could relate to. Whether they were fighting with a lightsaber, or just a plain old sword, or they had a magic hammer or a shield, heroes were defined by several very important and universal factors, and unfortunately, I feel like we're entering a period in entertainment and visual media where heroes are on the decline. A while ago, I heard something interesting about why Hollywood finds it so difficult to create a Superman film. And it's because his values and character are seen as old-fashioned, and people cannot relate to him anymore. That's why in the most recent versions of Superman that we've seen, I've always felt that there was more of an emphasis placed on his power rather than his character. Hopefully, the upcoming James Gunn movie will prove the naysayers wrong, but I do find it interesting that for all the visual beauty of Zack Snyder's versions, Superman felt far more alien than he did an actual human. His character didn't feel fully developed into the person that the comics and his earlier films supposed him to be. And it made me vaguely disappointed because for all of the grand nature of the Snyder films, there was the underlying theme of emphasizing what made him different from humanity, rather than the ways in which he is like the humans. Superman isn't the only example of the ways in which Hollywood has been struggling to put heroes back onto screen, however. With some exceptions, of course, we have seen many classic heroes misrepresented or else flat out abused by writing that says heroes are something to be laughed at, or mocked, or not taken seriously. There are many ways in which we've sort of lost our way and our understanding of heroes in more recent times. But I can think of 4 specific examples of how the heroes of today just aren't heroes anymore, and won't be again until these 4 things are brought back. And the first one is identity. One of the things that has become increasingly obvious about the so-called heroes of the last half-decade is their own ambiguity. We do not know who these people are. There are a lot of movies and shows in the last few years that showcase so-called heroes where their journeys begin in the middle of the story rather than from an organic starting point. The most recent example of this is probably Brave New World, which recently released in theaters and displayed fully throughout the 2.5-hour runtime that the very idea of heroes is not fully understood. There's far too much ambiguity about the character of Sam Wilson. I do not know who he is in comparison with the person who has held the shield before him. When the MCU first began, one of the best things about those early movies was the emphasis they all placed on character development, particularly for Steve Rogers. Steve was the sort of person who would fight a bully bigger than him, jump on a grenade to save his fellow soldiers, and his heart was seen as the reason that he was worthy to receive the serum and become Captain America. Steve Rogers showed us all throughout his trilogy who he was, from his unending belief in the inherent goodness of others, his unwillingness to give up in the face of terrible odds, to his ability to understand people on a fundamental level and speak to the core of who they were. We do not get that from a character like Sam, who, though he is a good man, does not have the same identity development like that Steve did. He's not driven by the same purpose, or has the same levels of insight that his predecessor did. The same is true for characters like Iron Man and Spider-Man, who have faced very grim odds and stood firm under pressure to either think or fight their way out of their circumstances. You also see this from characters like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Luke Skywalker, whose personality traits, dreams, and goals are so well defined from the beginning of their stories right until the end. The problem with these characters, unfortunately, is that they have been written to have lost their way. We knew who they were, but the writers have taken away the identities that we have loved and talked about for years and turned them into vague, opaque husks of the bright personalities and abilities that they used to have. We aspire to be these characters because of how they thought, what they did, and who they were. Obi-Wan Kenobi was the stoic mentor who was duty and honor bound to take up the role of his master and care for a child that he felt unsuited for. He was a bulwark for the light side of the Force and would do whatever was possible to prevent the Sith from prevailing, even if it meant killing his best friend. He was resigned to going into exile for years and remain in hiding so he could watch over Anakin's child and keep Luke safe. Obi-Wan was a self-sacrificing character, someone who put the needs of the many over his own. He wasn't a cowardly person who could have turned away anyone in need, no matter how dire the circumstances, and yet his status as a hero has been diminished because of the need to tell the stories of lesser characters whose identities are not defined or their character is purely negative. We knew who Eric Draven was from his original film, someone who had come back from the dead for vengeance, but who clearly still cared about the innocent and looked for ways to help them, despite not needing to. He wasn't a drug-addled loser who engages in bloodbaths to bring his unremarkable girlfriend back from the dead. But even worse than a loss of identity is the attempted storytelling of a character who has no identity at all. Characters like Rey and Eric Draven and Riri Williams and Echo and Shang-Chi and Sylvie and Jane Foster and America Chavez do not have any defining characteristics or any reasons for why we should see them as heroes. Instead, their stories are nothing more than a lot of exposition about how we should accept the fact that they are heroes without any examples or reasons. And ill-defined heroes have no business pretending to be heroes. A second equally important reason for the decline of the hero is merit. Merit is directly tied to the concept of the hero's journey, which is a story as old as time itself, about a person going through a meticulous and sometimes brutal journey to emerge on the other side a hero, or at the very least, a better person than who they were. As mentioned earlier, the hero's journey doesn't really exist anymore, so the slow and sometimes painstaking process of character development has fallen away from modern storytelling. And nowhere is this more evident than the idea of mantles. In an effort to insert personal ideas or politics into stories that have no need of them, the nature and identity of a hero, something that has been created and is intrinsically tied to them, has become a mantle that can be passed on to anyone, no matter who they are or what they have done. This was quite evident in the recent Indiana Jones film, where Helena Shaw is set up to take over for her godfather, when audiences were told that she is smarter than him, more clever than him, more capable than him, younger than him, and he is simply an old man waiting to die. She did nothing to merit the role of Indiana Jones, and given the earlier test screenings where audiences were treated to the sight of a dead Indiana and Helena Shaw picking up the hat and putting it on her head, which were extremely poorly received, that opinion was shared by everyone. Another infuriating example happens at the end of the recent Star Wars trilogy, where Rey claims the name of Skywalker despite having done nothing to earn it. And due to the fact that she is a direct blood descendant of a powerful and evil man who hated the Skywalkers and nearly wiped them out before being killed by one of them, this is completely ridiculous. Or Riri Williams, who has done nothing to merit the role of Iron Man, and who only exists because of pure spite. Or Monica Rambeau, who walked through a magical wall and got her powers for no other reason than the writers couldn't think of another way to give them to her. Or even Batwoman, who was a much older example, and whose show thankfully has been cancelled, who walked into the Batcave and simply took the Batsuit before demanding that it wouldn't be perfect until it fit a woman. No thought or effort is placed into giving these so-called heroes a reason to be heroes. They have not suffered or overcome physical challenges or problems that would test them and reveal their character. They do not deserve the abilities or titles that they have because they have not earned them. It also can't be overstated how much sincerity plays a role in the decline of the hero, too. Scenes of genuine heroism, where the hero is respected for the acts he or she performs and is just a person who is completely serious about their role, have all but disappeared. Writers these days are so desperate to entertain that they forget how to impact. One of the reasons that Top Gun Maverick did so well a few years ago was the fact that it took its storyline and its hero seriously. It didn't contain any scenes where the main character was humiliated beyond some mild heckling that was immediately shot down. There were no jokes that took away from the seriousness of a scene or their impact. Lack of sincerity has turned stories into expressions of nihilism and mockery, where they will laugh at the ways in which a hero once expressed himself, mock the feelings of others, or simply disregard them entirely and take the story in an entirely different direction. Sincerity is the currency by which audiences can relate to or cheer for characters. It's necessary for a story to feel genuine and to make an impact on the people watching it, and it's hard to take movies seriously without it. Sometimes that works if the film or the show is a comedy where the main function is to make people laugh, but even the best comedies had moments of sincerity where the main character expressed themselves without others laughing at them or not taking them seriously. And if we can't take stories seriously anymore, then what use are they? And maybe the most important reason for the decline of the hero is morality. There exists within a lot of stories these days the absence of values or a moral code that clearly defines the heroes from the villains. Characters like Aragorn, who have been tempted by an absolute power and who refuse to give up even when it seems like the world is ending, don't really have much of a role to play in the movies of the last half-decade. A clearly defined morality is seen as uninteresting in the face of morally gray characters who are now pretty much a dime a dozen. Some movies or shows go so far as to twist the morality of their projects and make it seem like the heroes have switched roles with the villains. The most recent example of this would be, of course, The Acolyte, which is thankfully now cancelled and won't ever plague us again. The Jedi, a bastion of well-defined heroes who are peacekeepers and follow the light side of the Force, have been turned into some sort of police force, guilty of committing crimes and acting in a way that no self-respecting Jedi would, and as a result have no morality whatsoever, along with the Sith in the series, whose goal is to sexually corrupt the main character through the Force, or whatever. And the actors go so far as to admit the lack of morality and have the nerve to be proud of it.
I mean, the best parts about Star Wars is there is no good or evil. It depends on what side you're standing on, truly. You know what I mean?
Hijacking heroes is one thing, but turning their famed morality on its head into something twisted and shallow and just completely false is something else completely. But it can't be overstated just how much the lines have been blurred. And what's worse is that the people who have been in charge of these sorts of productions are completely proud of the immorality that their so-called heroes have. It's why we're living in a time where heroes don't really exist anymore. And until we bring back these four concepts, we're probably not going to be getting any stories or heroes that have any value. Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments section, and let the conversations begin. Until next time, everyone.